Hello and welcome to Cinema to the Letter. This episode is that indie known as Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. On Cinema to the Letter, we break down the very nature of cinema, letter by letter. For each episode of a film miniseries topic, we cover 6 films that fit a C for classic, I for indie, N for new, E for egregious, M for masterpiece, and A for atypical. Because who doesn't love an acronym, am I right? I am Thomas, and I might not remember... Did I host a podcast with you, Bryan? I think? Some vague memory, I'm not sure.
Oh, you definitely probably got your brain washed because of that. Hi, I am Bryan, and I also have cried in my car listening to a Beck song, so I really related to this movie.
Of course, for sure. But we're not the only ones here, Bryan, because we have another guest on. She's a writer in her own right, and you might have heard her on previous podcasts that used to exist on this feed. Miss Lili Labens. Lili, how's it going?
I'm great. How are y'all?
We're doing great. We're not crying at all.
No,
Like Bryan
definitely
mentioned.
Not yet.
No, the night is young. That's true for that. But so we sent you a list of movies, Lili, that we were doing for this season. You immediately jumped on to this one, Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. Why did you want to come on for this one in particular?
Well, it was difficult because you picked a lot of classics. This is such a quintessential millennial, even, whatever's before millennial and after Gen Z type movie. I think that so many people relate to, connect to. Charlie Kaufman has that effect on people, I think, no matter how out there he goes, he brings it back to a place where I think a lot of people can relate to. And I hadn't revisited this one in a while, so this seemed like a perfect excuse to rewatch and analyze my feelings on it. Good, almost 10 years after I watched it the first time. So I wasn't prepared for how I feel about it now, but it was like a no-brainer. I had to rewatch this. It's so good.
Yeah, I had a similar thing where I hadn't watched it in a while, but I recently got the Kino Lorber Blu-ray, and I was like, I finally got to play it. I finally, this was as good excuse to saying, like you mentioned, but it's also interesting just because given our season that we're doing here, which is one Oscar, it's interesting because this feels kind of like the quintessential example of particularly like a new millennium Oscar-winning like indie movie, for especially like it won for Best Original Screenplay. It feels like definitely one of the great examples of like a movie that was so culturally significant in terms of like the critical sort of like darling face of it that everyone was like, well, we gotta give it something. Let's give it Best Original Screenplay. We're not gonna give Kate that Best Actress award. Not yet. We gotta wait for the reader. That's exactly what she deserves it for.
Yikes.
But would you agree with that sort of sentiment of it, Bryan? Like what this kind of exists as to like in that description for the Oscars?
Yeah, I mean, for sure. Charlie Kaufman has this thing of like he is a really, really talented screenwriter that has very weird ideas that I think appeal to people who are like maybe have not seen a lot of weird movies, like like Oscar voters, especially around this time. But for me, like this movie, I watched it in high school, which is kind of the perfect age to see this movie, I think.
Yeah, 100%.
And I related to it way too much. Yeah, I mean, it was I think it was my introduction into Charlie Kaufman, and I think for a while I thought that it was one of the movies he had made or that Spike Jonze had made, but yeah, I didn't really know much about Michel Gondry at the time, and despite the fact that I had seen I saw The Green Hornet in theaters for some reason, which...
I think I did too. I think it was a slow time for movies.
Yeah. I did as well. It was Seth Rogen. It was January.
Right,
we needed something.
Right. Exactly.
Also a movie that I own 2 Blu-ray copies of this movie. I was gifted it as I guess as the movie person. People were like, oh, we'll just get you a Blu-ray. You like this movie, right? And someone got me a copy of this movie, so I have 2 copies of it. But yeah, I hadn't seen it in a really long time, and I was kind of like a lot of movies, I feel like that you watch in high school and kind of like really cling on to. I was a bit nervous to rewatch it,
Yeah.
but it still holds up for me at least.
Yeah, well, I had a similar thing, though sadly that's a bit longer of an experience as, I believe, the oldest person of this trio. Where it's like I also hadn't seen it since high school, but that's a bit of a longer time for me. But yeah, there's that weird thing that you're talking about where it's like the movies that you would put on like your wall as a poster not framed. Like
Yeah.
those are the movies you always worry about, like, is that gonna just like suck so hard now that I have some kind of wisdom at this point? And Eternal Sunshine feels like in so many ways, because it is very 2004 in particular, like it would just like be one of those movies that has not aged well in now the 20 years since it originally came out. But yeah, it's really interesting, especially considering, you know, kind of a big thing that intersects with Oscars here is Jim Carrey, who is, I think, just one of the most fascinating figures in sort of like 90s to 2000s kind of like mega stardom, and how he kind of like just piddled off after a certain point. But there was that time for a solid, I don't know, like 5 or 6 years where he was really gunning for the Oscar buzz kind of thing. Like after like Truman Show, and then leading to like Man on the Moon and The Majestic. There was that weird period where he wanted to really be treated seriously after being the clown, which I find really fascinating. Though I am curious, Lily, what's your relationship to Jim Carrey?
I think like most people, I grew up with him as The Mask and Ace Ventura and all of these like kind of cartoon come to life films because he has such a force on the screen and is such an incredible uh, physical comedian. I also grew up watching In Living Color because my mom had like a drama teacher that worked on the show or something like that, but we had some connection to it. And he is so incredible on that. I don't even know how young he is there, but he's just like relentlessly funny is like the only way I can describe him. And then yeah, I think in this period where he wanted to be taken seriously, like I am not Spock, like I'm not funny. Um, I kind of lost him in there, and I don't think I was really judging. I just don't think I was seeing a lot of these movies. But Eternal Sunshine really stands out because I think he toes that line very uh, well between comedy and drama, which are not very far apart as genres. So I think he is like the embodiment of that because he can just do both so well, you know?
Yeah, he has that real sort of like clown sadness kind of deal,
Exactly.
right? That feels very natural. Like apparently that was the thing, is that like Michel Gondry wanted him for the part, and it was mainly because like he just sensed this real sadness coming off of him. And I mean that's something that weirdly, as you know, time has continued on, we've kind of seen more and more like, oh, that sad clown continues to be kind of like his main sort of like online presence, especially whenever he does anything. It's just
Yeah.
it's so interesting. And he was also sort of like, for me, he felt like the first actor where I was aware of him as like a kid, where it's like I gotta see the Jim Carrey movie, like I have to. He's like so silly and wild. But Brian, what about you? Do you have a similar relationship to Carrey?
I didn't really grow up with like his classic movies at all, really. Like, I've never seen Ace Ventura, weirdly enough. But I have seen stuff like The Truman Show and unfortunately the Grinch movie he made, and like a lot of his kind of later 2000s like output, which is what I kind of grew up on. And then of course, you know, both Sonic movies, which he's genuinely great in. But yeah, like I think I always kind of knew of him. He was always just there. You know, he's one of those actors, and he's, you know, really one of a kind, right? Like he's one of those just one of a kind actors in Hollywood. And even as someone who didn't grow up watching his movies, like I knew his kind of thing, right? Like I would see like, you know, I would catch a movie of his like on TV for like 20 minutes or something, and I'd be like, oh, I know Jim Carrey. But yeah, I mean, I mainly know like, you know, I love The Truman Show and I love this movie, and those are both more of his more dramatic roles, more of his like, you know, quote unquote serious roles that he's taken on. He's so great in this movie, I think, and it's kind of insane to me how he can kind of like, I don't understand how Michel Gondry just like dialed him really down because there's not a lot of Carrey-isms in this movie, but I love him. I think he's great, and he's just such a fascinating figure. Like Thomas said, you and I were talking about him like recently, and his just kind of career and like where he is now and everything, and it's so weird to look at him now.
The real perspective to have with that, because like when I was younger, I always thought like, oh, like Ace Ventura and The Mask, those came like one year after the other, right? No, 1994 is this crazy year where he does Ace Ventura, The Mask, and Dumb and Dumber, and those movies make $750 million in 1994 money in 1 year. It's so fucking crazy. And I think that's the thing, is that like he is just like this guy who like his stardom started up so quickly that by like The Cable Guy a couple years later, he's making like $20 million off of that, and the first actor to ever do so. And then leading into like sort of the serious period we're talking about, it feels like you can definitely see that sort of, I mentioned that clown sadness of him just being like, I'm like entertaining for the crowd, I'm in front of everybody, I'm doing all these voices, my face is distorting itself right in front of you. And I think that really weighs on him. And I think it's really shown that it feels like he kind of like stretched himself out. And this is just like the husk of a plastic man. But yeah, you know what? We've been talking about Carrey. Let's go ahead and just jump into the movie now. We're going to play the trailer here now for Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind.
My name's Clementine, by the way.
I'm Joel.
Do I know you?
Change your heart.
I had the best night of my entire life.
Look around.
I love you.
In order to recapture what you had,
It's 3 o'clock.
I'm crawling out of my skin.
Change your heart.
first you need to forget what you've got.
Okay.
It will astound you.
My name is Joel Parrish, and I'm here to erase Clementine Christian's.
I need.
I'm erasing you and I'm happy! By morning you'll be gone!
This is a hoax, right?
I don't want this anymore! I want to call it off!
Starring Jim Carrey and Kate Winslet. Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. Easter Monday at 9 on 4.
So, Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind came out March 19th, 2004, from French director Michel Gondry, who has a very curious career, was initially known for doing a lot of music videos, and Bryan Anderson, you've watched a lot of his music videos in the last couple of days.
I watched a
for
few of them.
research.
Yeah. Especially just because he's made music videos for a lot of artists I love. Like he did a Radiohead music video.
Of course.
He did Bjork music videos and like a Daft Punk one and stuff like that. And like, yeah, a great music video director, but his movie career is very odd. Which, I mean, Thomas, I think you're more familiar with his movies than I am. Is that right?
Yeah, I've seen a fair amount of them. Because, I mean, his first feature is Human Nature, which I saw fairly recently, which was an interesting one because it's the first collaboration with Kaufman. And it's basically about, like, Patricia Arquette is this woman who has grown up, like, ever since she was younger, she was super hairy. And it turns out she's, like, very much related to, like, pygmy chimps. And they find a male who's played by Rhys Ifans, who is, like, has a similar kind of, like, hairy vibe. And Tim Robbins is, like, the scientist who's researching about all this. And he was in a relationship with Patricia Arquette. It's weird. It's not a great movie, necessarily. But you can see kind of, like, some of the Michel Gondry, like, sort of forced perspective and, you know, that kind of, like, fun stuff that, like, we end up knowing him for. But then his next feature would be Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. And then I've seen his unfortunate person to bring up with the concert movie, Dave Chappelle's Block Party, which is a really good concert movie, though. Like, that's, like, where the fucking Fugees reunited in, like, 2006 for, like, that particular one. It's interesting. It's a fun concert movie, even if Dave Chappelle shows up. But then The Science of Sleep, which I haven't seen before, but feels very kind of twee 2006 indie like we were talking about. Yeah. And then Be Kind Rewind, which is a fun little movie where, like, it's basically about, like, Jack Black and Yazin Bey, formerly Mos Def, play two guys who run a video store, and it turns out they demagnetize all the tapes accidentally, so they just do remakes of the movies with, like, cardboard and shit. So they do, like, The Lion King, but there's, like, a cardboard lion and shit like that. It's a very sweet movie, honestly. It's very cute. And then The Green Hornet, which we all have seen, apparently, and we all, I'm sure, love dearly. Right? One of the great superhero films.
I haven't seen it since I saw it in theaters, and
Same. And I want that on the record, actually.
I mean, I have no inkling to rewatch it, although I am curious, especially because a lot of that cast is like Christoph Waltz is in it, and like David Harbour apparently, and Cameron Diaz, and like it's a weird cast and a weird movie, and a based off a weird like source material. So, but yeah, that's kind of his last like Hollywood movie, which is weird.
Because then he goes back to France to stuff like Mood Indigo, which just like I remember seeing the trailer for, and I'm like, oh wow, this looks like exactly what you would do after a big budget like blockbuster movie, like a fantasy driven romance in French. Of course you would. But yeah, how do you feel about Michel Gondry, Lily?
Well, I am only just now realizing he did Be Kind, Rewind, and I do love that movie. And
Yeah.
I was watching a little like behind the scenes featurette from Eternal Sunshine, where that I'm sure y'all have seen if you have the DVD, but they're just talking with people in the cast, but mostly Michel Gondry, and basically talking about how wildly creative he is, and he looks at the things that are not possible and he laughs at it, and he takes it as a challenge and he's going to do it. And what I like about Be Kind, Rewind is how creative Jack Black has to get. And anything with Jack Black, like sign me up. But it's not something, I mean, his filmography, I would not connect any of them to one another. I just am kind of amazed at it. But I guess with the Charlie Kaufman collaboration, I could see it in like the descriptions of that Human Nature movie and stuff. But from the just brief interview I watched with him, he does or did seem like an interesting figure. And I wonder what happened to him, because I see echoes of this movie, particularly its visual style, and so many other directors these days. I was just thinking about like the Daniels and
Yes.
Christopher Borgley, who just did Dream Scenario and Sick of Myself, and I guess Yorgos, like all these people who have this profound visual style, but I do think has echoes of these like wildly, outrageously messing with size and perspective, and like basically anything that is intangible he can bring to life. And so I just wonder how we get from that to the Green Hornet. And I'm not even trying to throw shade at that. It's just like seems like such stark contrast. So I don't know how to feel about him, honestly.
I mean, this happens to a lot of foreign filmmakers when they come over to the U.S., especially when they start off with like something a bit more intimate, with Eternal Sunshine, a bit more indie. Even though we're doing this as our eye for indie, but it's a $20 million budget, and it stars like a guy who had just been in Bruce Almighty, a movie that made like $500 million the previous year. So and Kate Winslet, of course, star of Titanic, so shit like that. So it is that kind of Oscar indie where it's like, it's not quite indie. But in any case, it still feels like a very like odd, interesting movie that grabs people's attention. So Hollywood's naturally like, let's put you into a slot. How about this Green Hornet movie we've been trying to make for a fucking decade? Sure, you can do that, I guess. But yeah, I think the only real connection I see, even in some of Green Hornet, is sort of that, you mentioned like that DIY aesthetic that's kind of there with like the forced perspective and a lot of like the cardboard stuff that we see, and stuff like in Be Kind, Rewind. There's that kind of like familiar, almost like we're kind of making this from patchwork. Like the music video I was actually watching right before we got on here was the one he did for the White Stripes. I believe it's called The Denial Twist, which like it starts off with them performing on a weird version of the Late Night with Conan O'Brien stage, and it looks exactly like the stage, but it's just small, and they're normal people like performing in it, and there's like a little person with a Conan cutout face that's just like moving around like, here are the White Stripes, everybody. So it's that kind of like weird, surreal, dreamlike, as it were, state that fits perfectly for this movie. And I think it's also made this, we'll probably get into more, like, this is one of the most influential movies of, like, the 2000s. For sure. Like Lily's mentioned, you see so much of the ripple effects from this movie forward.
To go back a bit to, like, his kind of creativity, I think, is, like, when you watch a lot of those music videos, like, you understand why he was given such a chance to work in Hollywood with big actors and everything, because like there's so much creativity in like all of those music videos that he made, and so you get why Hollywood was like, we'll let you make a movie. Like he is such a creative person. I mean, as much as it is very 2004 with like obviously just the outfits, the hairstyles, the music, right? Like the
F slur. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. True. Yeah. Very true.
But even just the kind of romance element of it, I think, is still really relevant in a lot of movies now, and just feels very modern. It's weird to think that this is 20 years old at this point, but it feels like it could have come out in the past decade or so. It doesn't feel like it's dated, really, besides that F slur, which is like she says it, and you're just like, oh, Kate, what are you doing?
Yeah.
Rose, what are you saying?
Yes. Rose, no, stop.
Not to jump too ahead into like the cast of this movie, which is insane, like insanely, what a cast. But like, I can't imagine seeing like, and this is someone I just watched all of the Lord of the Rings movies like a couple weeks ago. It's very weird seeing like those movies and then seeing Elijah Wood in this movie, because his look is so scummy, and then everything he does is so like scummy and like awful. He's an awful person. And it's just so weird to get that after like seeing him as Frodo, who is like so sweet and like just such a lovely, lovely character. But yeah, just his goatee.
Oh, yes.
Unforgivable.
Absolutely insane.
And particularly, like, even his hoodie, like, feels douchey just as he's wearing it.
Yeah.
Yeah, but he is great in this movie, as is everyone in this movie. I mean, the whole cast is just really, really great. And, like, I mean, we can kind of, I guess, dive into more of them, but, like, Kate Winslet is really incredible. And, like, I assume you guys, as a bit older than me, kind of really grew up on, like, Kate Winslet, especially in Titanic, I would assume, right?
Yes, 100%.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One of my favorite Kate Winslet roles, Deep Cut. If you've ever watched the Ricky Gervais show Extras, which at its time was like excellent. I can't speak to anything that man does now, but back in the day, basically would always have some A-lister, typically British, make a cameo on an episode super casually, because the premise is him and his best friend are both like extras on all these movie sets. And Kate Winslet is in this like nun movie they're shooting, and so she's like super religious and super devout, and then she just has like the nastiest sailor mouth when the camera's cut, and she's just so rude and awful. And there's something very satisfying about seeing someone who plays so sweet. Even in this movie, she's a little idiosyncratic and impulsive, but she's still very like a sweetheart, and it's just so fun to see them break out of that. And with this role, I do think she is both kind of crass and cute, but I love that. And she can do that. And Mare of Easttown, after watching that, watching her vape convincingly, she can do anything.
Yeah. And it's especially fascinating because this is during that kind of like Oscar starved craze for her as well. Before, like I said, they eventually give it to her for The Reader. Because she's like nominated for Titanic and a couple other things. It's like during the like late 90s, early 2000s. And this one was definitely sort of like a different turn for her, because usually she does play kind of like typical British roles and stuff like that. But this feels like a bit more opposite. And it's fascinating considering there's the term Manic Pixie Dream Girl that comes about weirdly the year after this movie comes out with Elizabethtown to describe Kristen Dunst's character in that movie, which is wild to think about given she's also in this movie. But yeah, basically just like, oh, this like very flighty love interest who has these like weird kind of tics and is quirky, and that makes her like get this main protagonist dude out of his shell. Like, it's a common trope that happens, and it feels like there were examples of that before Elizabethtown, but it feels like Winslet is really kind of like deconstructing what a character like that can really be, especially in terms of like some of the implications that are like not extremely stated, but there's kind of an implication that there's some sort of disorder with Clementine, perhaps bipolar, perhaps something like that. They do a great job of like really making her such a fascinating character and really developing sort of both sides of it between Jim Carrey and Winslet, but also still keeping it within Carrey's perspective for like most of it, except for when we do cut over to like her post the procedure and stuff like that. I think they do a great job of like kind of balancing out like who she really is versus what his perception of her is at the same time throughout all this.
Yeah, I mean, it's because I also thought about like the whole Manic Pixie Dream Girl thing like while watching this movie, but like she's far more like, she's a bit prickly in a lot of like, especially like their little like meet cute on the train and everything, the way she is kind of like a bit more like forward and a bit more like, I don't know, there's something kind of like, I can see why like Carrie's character is more like, is kind of like a bit put off by her, a bit like scared and intimidated by her. But she does come off as quite confident, which I think, you know, kind of helps alleviate a lot of that manic pixie dream girl energy. She can be kind of crass and very like blunt in what she wants, right? Like when she kind of asks him like about the baby, right? And like, I don't know, it's a lot of that stuff that I think makes her a bit more of a three-dimensional character, as well as like what you said, where like keeping in mind that like a majority of this movie is Carrie's perspective, basically, which I think is such a fascinating way to handle that like idea, even though like it hadn't happened yet, right? Because it's the next year with Elizabethtown, but it's a really like interesting kind of dynamic there. And I think Winslet is really great in this movie. Titanic was probably one of the first movies I ever saw, and so she was one of my like, you know, first times ever seeing a movie star, and I love her. I think she's great, and like a couple years after this, she does like Little Children, which I think she's really great in, which she probably should have won an Oscar for. I'm gonna be honest.
No, The Reader, buddy. That's where it's at. Yeah. Holocaust drama where she can't read. That's where it's at.
But I still love her though. Like I actually haven't seen Mayor of Easttown. I really want to. I've seen like pictures of her like vaping, and I'm like, this is so great.
Mood.
But like, she's great in like Avatar: Way of Water as well, where she's like playing like a, you know, she's a great actor, and I think she often does do like a lot of bad, weird movies. Like, remember Collateral Beauty? Like,
oh boy, do I remember Collateral Beauty. Never forget Collateral Beauty.
But no, yeah, she's really great in this movie, and I think her character is really fascinating, and I think has really aged interestingly, but I think still has a dimensionality to her.
Charlie Kaufman is really excellent at revealing people in like a methodical, careful way. One of my favorite movies is Adaptation, and I just love the way that each character is introduced and how their relationships to each other morph and evolve just as they do in real life, but at a different pace because we're watching a movie. And I think what Eternal Sunshine does well is we really do only see her from his perspective at first, and we see these very surface things like, oh, maybe she has a drinking problem. She says she changes her hair a lot. She seems very kind of erratic and impulsive, and these things are all true. And then what you find out is also true is she's also very sensitive, and she tries to connect with him, and what always breaks my heart is just her saying like, I want to know you, like I want to know who you are. And it doesn't seem like she's asking for much at all, and she's very caring and sweet, but also the reality is it's not the easiest thing for people to do sometimes. So I think they just do a really good job of not giving away all that at once, and where other manic pixie dream girls might lack is that you kind of get a lot of surface level aesthetic things and not always a ton of depth, but I think she has it.
Yeah, I think a big part of that is like the initial scene where we see her where she's on the subway with on the train with Jim Carrey. I think that, and also the scene later on that we do get where like we actually find out how they first met on the beach. I think both display that kind of thing where she comes over to him after she sees him kind of like over awkwardly to the side, kind of looking at her and not really knowing what to do, where she sees it like, oh, this is another person who feels kind of outcasted. So I do want to kind of like having a conversation with them, trying to know a bit more about them, like you're mentioning, Lily. And I think that's what makes her instantly very warm, but at the same time, you can tell why like these two people are attracted to each other, and then why later on that relationship just falls apart because they're two just like personalities that can't really mesh in an actual like stable relationship for very long.
She takes his chicken.
That's true. Takes his chicken right off the plate. Exactly. The first move any lady should really do. Just take some chicken off the plate.
I love Carrey's delivery where he's like, and then you just took it without me saying anything. Like I but like I mean, and to kind of go into the Charlie Kaufman of this all, which is so fascinating, and he's such a fascinating writer, of course. But I think what's so great about this movie is that Kaufman is so great at writing like kind of pathetic people, you know, like really like sad sacks. And like he, like obviously like Adaptation has a lot of that, and Being John Malkovich has that, and like his own movies that he's directed have a lot of that. But like the thing about Carrey in this movie, and like is that he is that character. And it almost feels like, especially watching like rewatching Adaptation, like it feels a bit like he's making fun of that idea of like someone who is so like self-deprecating and like just so like down all the time. And yet I think he handles it with like a real sincerity for that character. Like you said, Lily, he really like cares about like his characters and people, and like unraveling these people. And I just find that so interesting, the way that he's able to like still make one of his characters in the way that he does. Like Jim Carrey feels totally like a Charlie Kaufman character. Although his hair is like less frizzy than it should be, I feel like, but yeah, like I think Kaufman is a really like, I think people, when they think of Charlie Kaufman, they generally think of like him having such a wild imagination. He comes up with these crazy ideas, but when I think of him, at least, I think of how great he is at writing people and really understanding like what makes people tick, and like their different like problems that they have, just things that they're going through and all that stuff. And I think that's like such a great element of this movie, and it's one of the reasons I just love Charlie Kaufman in general. But I mean, yeah, how do you guys feel about Charlie Kaufman overall? I'm curious.
I mean, I I I think I like him so much that I have purposely avoided certain films of his that I get a vibe that I'm not going to love it. I could be so wrong, and I hope to be proven wrong, and I will watch them someday. But like, I remember when I'm Thinking of Ending Things came out, it was so polarizing that I wanted to wait for like the discourse to die down. I was like, I'll get to it, and I still haven't. But I love Adaptation. I love this movie. I didn't finish Being John Malkovich. It's one of the few movies I have turned off. I was also too young, I believe, for that. So
Sure,
it might have been the problem, but I don't know. What about you, Thomas?
Charlie Kaufman, especially ever since he started directing things, I've dubbed him the king of dude, are you okay cinema?
Yeah.
Because like all of his movies, like it's interesting because when you have these ones that weren't written by him but were directed by somebody else, like Eternal Sunshine or Being John Malkovich, there's a bit more at least whimsy coming off the directors, who can take like sort of his surreal elements and create a bit more of like a fascinating, fantastical world that at the same time complements kind of the tragedy that underlines his movies. And then when he's behind the wheel, he just does not stop with like the bleakness. Especially, I think of Ending Things is like one of those movies where I saw it in the deep pandemic and I thought it was great, but I also never want to watch it again. It feels like truly such like a very inward look at just like a person completely collapsing. And I'm just like, I don't know, especially at that time in like, I don't know, September 2020 was a weird time.
A great thing where nothing bad was happening.
Right, good point. But yeah, I think that's the thing is I love even his movies. Like Synecdoche, New York is another example of that, where I just love like how that movie just unravels with like its escalation of just the weird fantastical layers of like a play, like a playwright writing a play, and then it turns out he is actually part of the play, and the play never ends, and the play keeps going, and stuff like that. Just insanity that at the same time I'm very compelled by, but also once again, anytime I see movies directed, just like, do you need to talk, Charlie? Charlie, you need to talk to somebody?
Yeah, I specifically did not rewatch Synecdoche, New York, or Anomalisa, or I'm Thinking of Ending Things before this, because like, yeah, that element has always been there, of course, right? And all his movies like deal with people who are like deeply depressed and like,
yes,
you know, have a very bleak look on kind of their life. But like, really, when he starts directing is really when like I start to like be like, I don't think I can deal with this right now. Like, I don't think I can deal with the themes of Synecdoche, New York, especially right now. Yeah, he's also just such a fascinating figure because he clearly has such an understanding of like his place in Hollywood, obviously, and like Adaptation is so much of that, like,
right.
But really in recent years, especially as he's like struggled to get projects made and just has not really been able to keep working. Yeah, like I'm a bit worried for him at times, but I just always really want to see what he has to do because he is such a really great writer and he's a great director. Yeah, I think he's such a fascinating figure, but I don't know. Yeah, he has a bleakness, and especially with working with like Spike Jonze, who is like very weird to think about as well. Just it's very weird to think that like Charlie Kaufman and a guy from who was known for like Jackass and like music, also music videos, like made movies together for a little bit. It's a weird combination, but yeah, I love him, and he's one of these guys who I'm like, I wish that he was just given like permanent blank check forever to just make whatever he wants, because he's such a specific like figure, I think, and like people love his movies, but he's just kind of struggled in years to get projects made, which kind of sucks.
So wild, they seem so commercial.
Right, exactly.
Right. Why didn't Netflix release that thing of ending things at a time where theaters could be open? Just like everyone's blockbuster packed into them thinking of ending things. Though it is also weird, like apparently one of the things he's done to like kind of make a living during all this is he has rewritten a lot of DreamWorks movies. Like he rewrote Kung Fu Panda 2, apparently did a draft on that, weird. Which is odd. And apparently he has like a one that he's getting writing credit for called Orion and the Dark.
Yeah, I've
which
seen
is like
this.
Right. That's an upcoming DreamWorks movie that he just has a writing credit on. So I'm sure it's going to be a great, entertaining kids movie that doesn't deal with any dark, depressing things at all.
Traumatize those children.
But yeah, I think with Eternal Sunshine, it's such a great balance of what we're talking about with like that kind of sad sack energy from a Carrey, but also at the same time the complexity of like how the story is told non-linearly. I can say that word correctly. And I just love that he's able to watch, especially like this is a movie where I hadn't seen since I was in high school, but I've just like had it on in the background and watching with the commentary in just the last couple of days since I rewatched it. And it's so fascinating just seeing all the details when you rewatch it, just like, oh wait, yeah, that's why. Because like when I first saw this, it blew my mind. It's like, oh wait, he's like in the memory thing now, like this whole time. He's been there and we're just like experiencing it. And I think like Gondry's style complements that beautifully. Where it's just like how certain like memories fade out. Like that one bit where he's talking to the guys, he's getting mail out of his mailbox. Where we see initially just like the actual memory. And then we see like the fading version of it. And how that guy just literally disappears into the fuzzy abyss and everything. That feels like it could be in a Charlie Kaufman directed movie. That would be like a nightmare that you couldn't really fathom. Versus here it just feels like it's odd and it's off, but it still is like fascinating to where like you want to just know more at the same time. I think that could only happen with like Gondry doing this service to Kaufman's work.
There are even elements that could be like horror when their faces are kind of distorted and
yes.
You know, just various quick cuts that are so jarring. I love how it's like 10 different genres in one, and that's why I brought up like the Daniels earlier, because it just has an everything bagel quality to it as well. It's like I love a maximalist movie, and I love that every detail matters. Nothing is a mistake or an accident. I just think it's so cool.
But at the same time, it's a casually maximalist movie.
True.
Which is so interesting about it. Where it's like there's so much complexity, but the style of it is so like grounded in DIY. That like the scene where Carrie's like sort of entire world is breaking down. He like goes up to Elijah Wood in the bookstore and turns him around just the back of his head the entire time.
It's a really cool effect.
Right. That has like kind of like a weird nightmare quality, but I was watching a behind the scenes thing of how they shot that. And they just had Elijah spinning around in the chair for a while. So then they would just map on like the back part just throughout with like later in post-production. And it's like, that's how simple that effect is. But like, it's so unsettling, but not in a way that like, once again, in a Charlie Kaufman movie, you would be like in a corner crying about it.
I mean, there's so many details I love, like that are kind of like, because yeah, it is a maximalist movie, right? It's doing a lot. And a lot of those like, you know, I think of them as dream sequences, but they are like when they're in his head and going through all like the memories and everything, like they feel dreamlike, and yet they are like so a lot of them are quick, right? Like there's like one scene and then we're moving on, and a lot of like the effects there are kind of weirdly subtle sometimes. Like I love when they're I guess it's when, thinking of it chronologically, after they're at the Montauk house and he goes to like her job at Barnes and Noble, and you can see like all the books like slowly like disappearing one after, and it's not like drawing your attention to it, but it's just slowly happening in the background. And it's just a really like simple but really effective like effect. Like that one.
Particularly the one where like all the books disappear and then he like suddenly goes through Jane Addams' doorway.
That's
just very
casual.
casually.
The transition.
Yes.
It's a really like great transition, and I think that's like a Michel Gondry thing, right? Like that's kind of one of the things he does in like a lot of his music videos, of just like transitioning from two different points in the story just seamlessly, right? And he does it a lot in this movie, like all of the mind stuff when they're just like I guess they're trying to like hide from Tom Wilkinson, like trying to find them in the dream. It's very weird, but like all those sequences are just really seamless and really bleed together in a way that I just like found really like beautiful still and feel very dreamlike, which I is a weird, it's a very interesting marriage of Gondry and Kaufman, kind of doing those two like nightmarish but dreamy and hazy kind of things, which I love.
To the degree that that's how I kind of like imagine when I think of like me having a dream or me like experiencing a memory. It feels kind of like this, where there's obviously like a movie like quality to it, but there's also, like we're mentioning, kind of like the environments bleed in between each other. It almost feels like you're kind of like on a stage and like the sets are moving around and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And I like how it's also like feels like diminutive, but just quirky and whimsical, because it could, like I said, could just be horror, like you said, like a nightmare. It's all very still like there's a charming quality to it, because which I think is necessary, because on paper it's a very sad story, and I remember avoiding this movie for years because I have a phobia of sad movies and everyone told me it was sad, and so shame on those people, because it's actually like a very healing movie, I think, or it can be, but part of why it is because it is so dreamy, it is so so whimsical and nice. And I also, just another like aesthetic technical element, I love how the science fiction is so like mundane and casual. Like we're talking about these casual maximalism thing, all the chords with their tech at his place, and it feels also like remnants of the 90s as well, but that kind of existed in the early 2000s. But it makes it all feel so much more real, like this could actually happen at some point in some time.
Which is weird to think about this movie as a sci-fi movie, which it is technically.
Yeah.
But like, I love all that stuff. Like the device that he has to like wear on his, like they put on his head, and like I love Mark Ruffalo's like little laptop that he has, which is such a very like early 2000s laptop.
Yes.
I love the way that it is kind of handled in that like you said, it's very mundane, and it's very like it's their job, and it's just very casual, and it's not over-explained, really, and yet you get it so quickly, and you get what's happening, and it's just, I don't know, really well done about that. But I think, like, the movie as a whole feels very, almost light on its feet, in a weird way. Like, it doesn't feel, like you were saying, Lily, like, the kind of quirkiness of it, where if Charlie Kaufman had directed this, I feel like it would have definitely, like, felt overbearing and very, like, oppressively sad. But I think Gondry really adds that lightness and that like weird quirkiness to it, which is weird to describe for this movie because it's also dealing with like very heavy topics.
I think it helps that it's quirky but not twee.
Precisely.
Because like there's a version of this movie that also would be much more twee and annoying and wouldn't quite work as well. Like honestly, I think of that with something like Me, Earl, and the Dying Girl, which I think is a movie that definitely loves this movie. Yeah. And I don't think is nearly as good as it thinks it is.
I was gonna say 500 Days of Summer, but that's
a better example. God, I hate that movie. I like Me, Earl, and the Dying Girl for
me too.
For the record, but
I'm a bit alone on that island. But yes, either of those aren't a bad example of that to me.
Should we get into more of a bit more of the supporting cast here? Because
Well, I mean, you were mentioning Ruffalo, and your background, we should mention, Bryan, is Ruffalo and Kirsten Dunst dancing in their underwear. An amazing sequence.
So good.
Truly. Yes. Especially for, like, the weird, like, it's such interesting comedic relief for, like, while this is going on, inside Jim Carrey's head, he's, like, at the pond that's frozen over where all the, like, lights are turned off, basically, and Kate Winslet gets, like, dragged. Like she's in an Evil Dead movie and shit like that. Meanwhile, they're dancing while high.
I love it. I mean, it's definitely an HR issue, but I think it's really funny.
Look, there's a lot of problems with their work ethic, I would say, based on this. Like, I love that they feel like people who have been at a job just long enough to where it's like, nothing's ever gone wrong. So we can, like, fuck off and do whatever as long as I'm, like, just keeping an eye on the laptop. But, then everything just turns to shit. It's, like, perfect.
It always, like, is so funny to me that they are, like, drinking his, like, alcohol and, like, eating his food and everything, which is such a, like, shitty thing to do, but I just think it's so funny that these guys, like, they do this job, and then they're just always, like, just drinking people's alcohol and, like, just stealing their shit and everything. And, like, when Elijah Wood is talking about, like, Clementine, and he's saying how, like, when we did her, like, I took her underwear and everything, and Mark Ruffalo is like, do you know what, like, how unethical that is? And then they both have, like, this, like, weird, like, laugh that is so, like...
Yeah, and they just start laughing. But it is interesting because it's, like, in a movie that explores so many what ifs, it's, like, if you think about what if we did have the technology to do this, and what if this was, like, you know, another capitalistic endeavor, like, this would absolutely happen, unfortunately, with anyone. And I'm not even trying to say it's, you know... hashtag not all men, but you know, it's just like, of course Frodo would do that, and of course Mark Ruffalo would kind of chastise him and then laugh about it while they're like smoking a joint. That's part of, like, when I say quirk, I think I just mean like offbeat. It like goes all the way deep into like even the darkest parts of this movie. It's just still like there's a sense of humor, which is like true to life. You know, so I think it's fitting.
Yeah, I love particularly, like, the office that they're in, the little, like, facility that the whole brain drain thing is in. It looks, like, perfectly shitty, right? Where it's like, this is a thing that exists, but, like, it's clear, like, they're not doing great necessarily. I love, in the commentary, it's my favorite moment where it's super French Michel Gondry and Charlie Kaufman talking, and Kaufman says, like, oh, yeah, their digs don't look great. And Michel's like, oh, digs? What are these dicks? It's like their office doesn't look great, but it's true. Like, I think that's part of, like, the charm. I think that we're kind of mentioning the offbeatness is that, like, this is like something that would be in a strip mall. Like, there's probably a fucking, like, a Cold Stone Creamery next door or something that, like, gets way more traffic than these people do. And I think that's what's, like, so fascinating is that, like, it's so, once again, that kind of, like, lower DIY aesthetic that, like, yeah, you could see why, like, Ruffalo would think to fuck off and just, like, hang out with his girlfriend and eat donuts while they're smoking joints. And I really want to mention, this is an underrated Dunst performance for me.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
She's, like, so amazing in so many things, but this is, like, a great smorgasbord of all that she can provide with, like, her, like, sort of stoner girl initial outlook, which is, like, she's just dancing, and then, especially when things start fucking up, she just keeps saying, I'm so stoned. I'm so stoned. And, like, particularly her when Tom Wilkinson comes in, and she's just, like, kind of babbling in the way it's like, oh, yeah, this is exactly what, like, a stoner, when they're trying to, like, look cool in front of their boss.
She pulls the chair out for him. She's like, here you go. And we're good. And everything's fine and normal.
That's so good. And then when it turns and we find out that, like, oh, she was a part of this, and she, like, completely breaks down, it's, like, the first real indicator of, like, oh, yeah, somebody's gone through this. And when they realize that they've gone through this, it feels like almost they've been violated by, like, themselves in a weird way. It kind of reminds me of, like, if anyone has seen Severance, which has a similar kind of thing.
Yeah, weirdly indebted to this movie, actually.
No, I would love to watch it, but unfortunately Apple TV shows aren't real. They don't really exist, so.
Well, I don't know. Yeah, when you're on the same network as C.
Yeah, come on.
That's a good point.
And fucking, I don't know, The Morning Show. That's, I don't know.
Oh, The Morning, yeah, they got all those SAG nominations.
What was that Tom Holland one that came out this year?
Something about a bird or...
The Crowded Room or something. Yeah.
Well, I mean, also Cherry in terms of cinema.
Ugh.
I mean... wonderful.
Oh god.
One of the worst movies I've ever seen in my life. I'm not joking. I hate that movie so much.
It's pretty bad.
But yeah, no. Kirsten Dunst, who is maybe one of my favorite actors, who I have been in love with ever since I saw her in Spider-Man when I was a kid, and I was like, oh, this is my favorite actor ever. Also, I'm in love with her. But she's great. I mean, she's incredible. Whereas, like, I love her in all the Sofia Coppola movies, especially like Marie Antoinette, Melancholia, despite a lot of the stuff around that movie. But
what, that really fun movie that everyone can watch and just have a fun time watching?
A great press conference too at the Cannes Film Festival. Nothing weird or bad happened.
One of her great performances, really.
No weird controversial opinions or takes
No,
to take away from that.
But I think I remember when I first saw Eternal Sunshine, and I was really, like, I guess, surprised that it focused so much on, like, the workers, right? Like Kirsten Dunst, Ruffalo, Tom Wilkinson. Because I just wasn't expecting the movie to go that deep into, like, the inner workings of, like, this operation, I guess. And it's a really surprising and yet, like, a really fun element of the movie, like you guys are talking about. Like, them dancing is so much fun and so great, and, like, just them, like, drinking and having a good time. Almost every time I've watched this in the past, I forget about the Kirsten Dunst kind of reveal that she has had the operation done in regards to Tom Wilkinson. And it is one of the most, like, heartbreaking things in this movie to me, because it, like, I don't know, it is so beautifully handled, the way that, like, his wife is like, you can have him, you already did, and then just drives away. And it is just this, like, really, like, heart-wrenching moment, and she is so great, especially in the last scene that she has with, like, Ruffalo, where Ruffalo's like, I really liked you, like, I actually liked you, and I didn't know about, like, any of this stuff. And they have just this really great, like, final scene where they're both just, like, accepting their situation, and it's just so beautiful. And yeah, she's so great in this movie.
By the way, shout out, you mentioned her kind of Deirdre O'Connell plays Wilkinson's wife,
yes,
who has like 2 scenes in this movie and fucking rocks it, especially that scene you're talking about.
I totally forgot also about how deep we go with these supporting characters as well, and Kirsten's role in it too. And I think it's brilliant because it kind of drives home the point of the whole film. If by this point in the movie you haven't, like, learned anything, it kind of makes it all real, for me at least, because there is just such a, like, freewheeling or almost stream of consciousness type experimental vibe to everything we're seeing with Jim Carrey and Kate Winslet's characters, and just seeing their relationship out of order. And you get to know so much about them, to then be ripped out of that fantasy / nightmare and then into this reality that is the aftermath of what happens with this, and a very unique, specifically kind of predatory dynamic that the aftermath of that is, like, I don't know, it makes it a really, really harsh reality of, like, the consequences of this. And if anything, what kind of placates it is, like, the end with Jim Carrey and Kate Winslet. But I don't know, it is kind of it kind of complicates things even further for this movie, and that's why I have to give kudos to it, because I was also a bit nervous to rewatch, because I just romanticized the hell out of this movie, like everyone did when they were young. And I was a freshman in college watching this in film club with a guy I had a crush on, and it was like everything was like, the stakes were perfect for me to be obsessed with it. And then watching it now, I was like, oh, am I gonna hate it? But I don't. I do have some evolved feelings about eternal sad boy of the incel mind, Jim Carrey's character. But overall, I think that everyone involved does a really good job of hammering that point home of the kind of necessity to the pain, because it's all wrapped up in the pleasure, and vice versa. Sorry, I kind of rambled about that, but
no, I'm curious a bit more about some of those, like, sort of negative things, because we've been very positive and glowing about this movie so far. So go ahead.
I love it, and I'm not trying to shit talk. I think it's just like the film is simultaneously self-aware and delusional, but that's how I think humanity is. So, and Charlie Kaufman gets it more than anyone else. So I don't think anything is a mistake or bad. I love when Clementine says toward the end, I'm not a concept, I'm just a girl looking for a piece of myself, which I think is both like beautiful, profound, deep, and also kind of like hashtag just girly things. Like it's kind of a very simplistic uh thesis, you know, to this very complicated woman. It's like, that's like the core of her. But I think that's true to most people, and we just saw it like very much zoomed in on one couple, but then even in the little bits we see with the supporting cast, we see just how complicated people can be and how awful we are to each other, how much we want to like each other and other people to like us, and how we mess that up in the process. And I think if he were a perfect character, if Jim Carrey were a more likable character, I don't think it would work as well. I don't think their dynamic would make as much sense. So none of it is bad by any stretch. I just think I was a lot more attracted to Jim Carrey the first time I watched this, and you know, be like, oh, he can be sensitive too, and not just goofy and, you know, crossing his eyes. Watching it now, it's like he's still charming. I just think it's like I don't like what he says to Kate Winslet, man. You know, I can't get those mean words out of him. I don't think she's as mean to him as he is to her. I think that's my only gripe.
I agree. Yeah.
And I think that's part of what's interesting about this movie, because we talk obviously a lot about like the romantic angle of it, but even on just like the level of like memories overall, like when it displays that, it is such a movie about like that feeling you have where it's like, oh yeah, remember when I was a kid and I did this dumb thing? How fucking dumb was that I did that shit? Like, it has that kind of vibe of like looking back with like so much regret about a relationship, and then like by the end of it, it's all about kind of finding, well, at least there were these like little moments that we cling to that are kind of happy. And I think that's what's fascinating about particularly like the ending with you know, Carrie and Winslet kind of like finding each other and then realize like, well, maybe, I don't know, maybe those guys just fucked it up. Maybe we can like do different. And it feels kind of like a weird thing where there's the more hopeful reading on that like maybe they can drag it and do like a better job at it, which feels more like the Gondry side of things. Versus there's also the Charlie Kaufman read of like, if we forget our past, we're doomed to repeat it, literally, in this case. And I think that's what's so fascinating is like I think it kind of straddles both those things, and like you mentioned, like the kind of messy, complicated human way.
I mean, like, I guess since we're on the ending, I love the ending of this movie. I think it has really aged, for me at least, really well over time. Like, and I think this is true for like most movies, but like they change with you over time. And like when I watched this movie in high school and I was definitely like depressed and like probably like brokenhearted, I was like, no, the ending means that they're gonna get back together and then they're gonna break up because like it's awful and love is awful or whatever. But I think now like it is such a complicated ending, and I think it's a really like, for me at least, my kind of take on the ending is that like it is these two people realizing like, well, there's the chance that we just like this doesn't work out. Like I always think like her line when Carrie is like, I don't think those things about you, and she says, but you will. And like it's this idea of, you know, yeah, it could end really badly, but part of it is the memories, like literally like the whole movie is those memories, and like creating those memories and experiencing like life and love and all of those things, which I just is very bittersweet to me, because like there is always that chance of like, well, maybe they do break up because like they discover these things about them. But I think the journey and the experience is part of it, which I don't know, it really kind of still sticks with me even after seeing it like so many times.
That is interesting, because I kind of had the reverse thing. I remember when I was a kid and I saw this when I was in high school and I hadn't been in a relationship. There was that kind of thing of like, oh no, but you know, like Kate Winslet, she's so charming and goofy. She's so wild. Like she can get me out of my shell too. And now, revisiting, it's just like, oh man, yeah, this is all moving so fucking fast. Like we mentioned, like they meet each other on that train, and then like they're back at her apartment. And it's just like, oh yeah, you think about having a kid and stuff like that? It's just like, whoa, hold on. We're really cooking with gas all of a sudden. And I think that's what's really fascinating going back to is like, you mentioned that kind of bittersweet quality. Kind of like really realizing that we're just like, I don't know, people are just like fucked up, man. and they went through, like, everybody goes through their own weird shit, and then you try and kind of, like, make it coalesce together, and, you know, sometimes it's, like, sugar and honey, and sometimes it's, like, fucking oil and water. It just doesn't fucking match up. And I think that's what's fascinating. You can see why these two, like I said, are, like, attracted to each other, and why they would kind of have that almost foolhardy, like, no, fuck it, let's do it again. But also, it's just, like, there's certain, like, human incompatibilities that, you know, who knows what happens with their second attempt at the relationship. But I think it's a movie where, like you mentioned, Bryan, it's all about, like, look, this could fuck up, but who's to say we can't try again, kind of thing. Is, like, interesting, even though it's, you know, like I said, that Charlie Kaufman cynicism is still lingering throughout the pall cast over the whole thing.
Even, like, right before the very end, but, like, toward the end, I love when I think she says, it's going to be over soon, what do we do? And, or no, I guess it could have been him saying it, but someone says, enjoy it. I, like, botched that by not knowing who said what, but
I think it's when she says it at the beach house, right?
Like, yeah.
Yes.
I just love that, and I feel like that's also a very, like, in summation part of the movie and its message, and I love that because it's good and the bad all together, all the time, all at once.
Hey.
That's almost a movie.
I do feel like this movie, though, like, as this, like, portrait of, like, love, romance, like, relationships, it is one of the more insightful that I especially of kind of the 21st century, I think. Like, it all these things that we're kind of reading into it, but I think a lot about how this movie has, like, aged, and especially now in, like, 2024 watching it, and, like, I don't know, I was thinking of, like, the equivalent of this, like, procedure is, like, when you, like, break up with someone and you have to, like, go through your, like, Instagram and, like, delete all of, like, your pictures of, like, being with them, or, like, you go onto, like, their Instagram and see that they've deleted all your pictures of you, and you're just, it is that, like, weird heartbreaking thing, but, like, I don't know, it's a really interesting way that I think this movie has aged, and watching it now, I thought a lot about that for some reason.
Well, yeah, especially because, like, the whole message of the movie by the end of it really is just, like, I don't know, we have to, like, remember those things that we went through.
Right.
Like, when you have that weird realization of, like, I erased, like, 2 years of my life where I was with you in a relationship. It's like, no, you're erasing, like, not just, like, this person, but, like, a part of yourself when you do that.
Yeah.
And to the degree that you want to, like, integrate them into other older memories. Like, we haven't mentioned much about it, but I love all this stuff when he's a kid. Mm-hmm. And particularly where they have, like, whenever they edit from, like, you know, it's either, like, a little kid actor or then Jim Carrey in the same outfit. Like, when he's getting beaten up in the superhero, like, costume and, like, the whole bird thing. Like, that feels very close to, like, certain, like, uncomfortable childhood memories where it's just like, oh, boy, yeah. I have those, like, put way in the back of my head and I don't want to bother with. But, yeah, there's, like, that's especially where, like, Gondry's, like, forced perspective stuff, like, the kitchen and how that looks, and how, like, he's super small versus Kate Winslet, who I just love. Like, when she gets dressed up in that outfit, this dream version of herself, like, oh, fuck, this dress is great. Yeah. I wish I could take this with me.
I love this kitchen. I also love every time she calls him Baby Joel.
Yeah.
Yes. And that's the stuff where it feels like Jim Carrey's at his most Carrey-isms. Like, when he's in the little pajamas. Totally. He's, like, moving around the floor like, oh, I'm, like, about 4 years old. Oh, God. Oh, no.
When he does his, like, his eye thing trying to wake himself up, which I think is just, it's so funny, but also I love that it, like, he's like, oh, that worked. Like, for a minute, it worked.
Right. I don't know, Lily, did you have any other of the dream imagery you wanted to comment on?
I mean, I it's the little stuff that's also probably basic, but, like, the snow falling or the rain falling inside the apartment, you know, whenever they're in a car that's kind of driving by his life or seeing other things, just little scenes and vignettes as they're driving by, which was also cool. Watching this behind the scenes thing, and them talking about, there was, like, one guy in particular who was like, yeah, there were a couple scenes where there was a car inside of a building, and I thought we were done with that, and then we had to reset because Michel said there was another scene, and he sounded, like, really curmudgeonly about it. It's all just seamless and effortless seeming. Obviously not at all effortless, but it's just stunning, and I love seeing, like, hints of the visual style and so many things following it.
Another simple one like that is when he's in like that weird chair that he's like strapped into, and like he's in different environments, like on the street corner where you see like they're having that argument and stuff like that, but it's lit in the same exact way as it is like when he's actually in the office and stuff like that. Or even just the simple imagery of like that bed on the snowy beach.
Oh yeah. It's
it's just a perfect little simple image. So it's just like, I don't know, we put a bed in the middle of this beach, but like it says so much. That's like the most indie kind of parts of this movie. Where it's just like, I don't know, we put the prop in the middle of like the outdoors.
It's classic indie.
I love when he's a kid and he's taking a bath in the sink, and it like it transitions from like that to like I think it's them watching like the movie, like the drive-in theater, and it like Carrey does like this, like, and he's like all wet, and it's just such a like very simple like effect where they probably just had like a bucket of water like off to the side of the camera and like whatever, but it's so effective in like just like we were talking about, that like seamless moving from memory to memory like thing. I just love all of that stuff.
Or even like when the wall disappears while they're at that drive-in.
Yeah.
And like digitally. This is a great example also of like really simple digital effects. Right. As well. They're just like so seamless and perfect, especially for like this kind of indie-er budget. It just feels like, oh, we're just casually making like the entire world crumble.
Subtlety is very powerful.
True. Yes. Something that more filmmakers maybe should learn. In a modern context. But you know, we've mentioned a lot about the supporting cast. We haven't talked much about Tom Wilkinson, who recently passed away.
R.I.P.
Yes, and I know Bryan and I will get more of a chance to talk about him because in a couple of weeks we'll be doing our Michael Clayton episode.
Hell yeah, those baguettes. Nice.
Yeah, those baguettes. Get ready, folks. Coming up. But Lily, how do you feel about Wilkinson? Maybe in general, but also in this movie in particular.
Oh, he's wonderful, and I think just one of those actors who he's not a strictly character actor by any means, but he's just like in so many things that I think a lot of people don't know him by name, but they know his face. And yeah, I mean, I forgot he was in this one, and then just looking at like other Charlie Kaufman and Michel Gondry, or I guess it was Michel Gondry I was looking at. He's in a couple other projects of his.
He's in Green Hornet.
Green Hornet, that's what I was
saying.
Odd. Right. I did not mean to bring that up again.
This is secretly a Green Hornet episode, everybody.
Oh God. But he's got like a very like calming, warm presence, but can still inhabit a lot of different characters. But I think that's why he's so effective here, because he does seem like he could be the ring master of these kind of like crazy technicians that work for him, and they all really, it's funny and sweet how much they really respect him and talk about like how he's such a genius. And I think that's so interesting. And then reveal with him and Kirsten Dunst does complicate things, but I don't know if anyone could kind of balance that dichotomy or that kind of contradictory good guy, bad guy thing. I think he's a good pick.
Yeah, especially when like he just has that sort of like working man, blue collar almost version of like a scientist in this case, where like I mentioned, because of like the office and everything. But when he's like doing Jim Carrey's blood pressure and stuff, and he's asking like, so is it brain damage possible? Like, well, the whole procedure is technically brain damage, which is a great line in the movie. But also like it kind of displays like his authority and his bedside manner that initially just like makes the whole front kind of work of this entire establishment. But then the moment like he picks up the phone, it's like, what's going on? Oh God, hold on. I gotta get over there. Like he has that kind of like, he's so tired. Even when it's not like him waking up in the middle of the night, he looks like he's just gone through a whole life. He has that kind of like great character actor face.
He does look very tired in this movie. He looks tired in a lot of movies, and like Lily, you mentioned that he has a very warm presence in this movie, and like I agree. He looks like a doctor. Like I don't know. There's something about him in this movie that just looks like a doctor, but like there is something like in a lot of movies that is a bit menacing about him, and a bit kind of like, I don't know, there's like a hidden kind of menace there, which kind of like makes the kind of subplot with Kirsten Dunst, he adds to that complicated nature of that relationship. But yeah, he's so great and just really like nails the tone and like what he's doing and everything. I love, and like when he's just working on the laptop, just being like, and he closes it and he's like, okay, I'm done. Time to go home. And then like Ruffalo has to
Yes.
call him back in, like, to finish doing the procedure or whatever. Like, yeah, but I love him in this movie. He's great.
Yeah, and especially this was around the time like this and Clayton, where I kind of felt like, oh, this is one of those guys that I recognize. Like he's one of the first character actors who I'm like, I want to follow. Anything he does, like even when he pops up in something like Mission Impossible: Ghost Protocol for a scene, and just gives all the gravitas, just like you've been disavowed by the IMF. It's like you believe, like, oh man, I fucked up. Tom Wilkinson's having a private meeting with me in a car. I know I done fucked up.
Same with the year after this, he's in Batman Begins. He plays Carmine Falcone, and he's like so great in that scene.
That was definitely the first time I saw him in anything. Yeah, he's so great.
He's in The Lone Ranger. Who could forget that?
Well, I mean, he's the star of the movie, right? There aren't two other actors who star in that movie.
Yeah, no, it's just him talking to green screen horses.
He plays both roles.
Oh no, Tom, no.
Oh God, we've mentioned the Green Hornet and the Lone Ranger this episode. We're just going
sorry.
early 2010s
cursed movies,
box office bomb. Like
He's also in Rush Hour, so I'll palate cleanse with that.
Not a complicated movie at all.
No.
Especially, no one directed that movie, right?
God damn it. We can't have nice things. I shouldn't ever talk ever.
We can have Eternal Sunshine, though, which let's go ahead and do, I guess, any lingering final thoughts. We'll start with Lily. Any lingering final thoughts and about Eternal Sunshine, the Spotless Mind?
The fact that it has such lasting power and that nearly every person I talk to about this movie loves it. I don't think I've ever met anyone who doesn't. When I mentioned to like my friends that I was going to be talking about this, they like lit up and they're like, oh, I really want to rewatch that. I think it's like an inherently cozy feeling ascribed to it, because it is just such a warm, even though complicated movie. It's really just remained in the culture, like we've said, in its what it's influenced, but also just like, I mean, years after it had come out, I would see GIFs on Tumblr, and then I still see it like on Twitter. Like this, people are still obsessed, and I love that, because there are plenty of movies that people obsess over that I don't get the hype, but this is one that I absolutely do, and I think deserves it.
Yeah.
Well, Brian, what about your final thoughts on Eternal Sunshine?
Oh man, I love this movie. I think it's a masterpiece, 100%. And like, yeah, it has become this weirdly like beloved movie among like people around our age and younger. Like love this movie. Like even people I meet who like aren't really into movies, like aren't really like super into it, like we are, like love this movie, and like it is really beloved. And I love it. I think it's great. I think it's fascinating to look at Carrey in this movie. Like it's such a weird Carrey performance where he's so like obviously playing against type, but he's just so broken in this movie in a way I just love. And I think Winslet is so charming and so like great in this movie. The whole supporting cast is great. We didn't really mention, but the music is by John Bryan, of course, who also did like Punch Drunk Love, and is a great musician in his own right. But great music that really complements that kind of like quirkiness, but also a bit of that darkness that's in there. Like his music is really great for that. And yeah, I mean, it's a movie that has not really aged for me as well. Like I was kind of nervous to rewatch it, but I love it, and it is very like Lily, like you said, like very cozy. Like I feel like this was definitely a movie I watched like when I was like sick. I feel like for some reason, like it just has those like very cozy vibes, very indie vibes, of course, as well. And yeah, I love it. I think it's maybe my favorite movie that Charlie Kaufman has ever worked on in any capacity. I think it's a really like, as much as Charlie Kaufman I think has had a couple of like really lightning in a bottle moments with like Being John Malkovich, but even with like, I would say something like Synecdoche, New York, which has become kind of beloved over the years, I think this is his most fascinating and best work. And I love Michel Gondry's direction on this. I think it's great, and he just has a really, really keen style that I just really like is so fascinating, and I would love to see him return to, you know, making kind of movies in more of a capacity, because I think he's mainly been doing like TV and stuff. But yeah, I love this movie. It's very near and dear to my heart.
Yeah, and like everyone's been mentioning, I was worried revisiting this, especially considering, like, I remember at the time when I first saw this, it was kind of like one of the more hyped up kind of, back in the day, the pass around a DVD movie. Because this was definitely a movie that I first saw where, like, I know one of my cousins was like, "Oh, you should watch Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, man. It's so great." And I remember, like, being just, like, my mind being blown by it in that way that we're talking about, where it's just, like, it's, what it's doing with, like, the untraditional narrative structure and how it's commenting on a lot of, like, very human things, whether they're, like, very, like, positive and flighty and beautiful, or the, like, really uncomfortable things we don't really talk about. And I think in that way, revisiting it, it kind of feels like memory, where you are just, like, looking back at something and you remember all, like, the big sort of, like, flashier positive moments. And then especially going back to it this time, it did remind me of a lot more of just uncomfortable things about myself to some degree, like you were kind of mentioning, Bryan. But also at the same time, a lot of things that, like, how I used to feel back in, like, that high school age, but how I've grown at the same time. It does do that great thing where, like, a great movie grows with you, like was previously mentioned, where it's just like you see it from a completely different perspective every time, but it still has a lot of those great qualities that still make you, like, fall for it, even though it's for very different reasons than why you initially loved it. And yeah, that's why I'm glad, at least like 20 years later, it still really holds up. But let's go ahead and get into our usual segment here, Between the Lines. So on Between the Lines, every episode, Bryan, myself, and a guest, like Lili, if she just so happens to want to participate, will recommend another film that relates to, you know, the movie we're talking about in some way. Might be an alternate pick for an eye for indie kind of thing. And my pick, I'm going to go ahead and go here first, is a film from 2007 that did win at least one Oscar. It is the Joe Carney film Once, which is this Irish movie that is about these two musicians. Literally, their character names are Guy and Girl, played by Glenn Hansard and Marketa Igrolov. I apologize, ma'am. I fucked that up so dearly. But at the same time, these two musicians who initially find each other were like, the guy has just recently broken up with a woman, and the girl is just kind of like, you know, moving around trying to like find her place in this town and stuff like that. And they end up collaborating, and you know, they start singing on buskers on the street, and they kind of start getting like a bit more of a following, and they have like more of a great collaboration that turns into a bit of a romance, and how that kind of, you know, develops and eventually kind of falls apart. Spoilers with this little movie, but it is a true indie in that it was made for like $150,000. So much more low budget than Eternal Sunshine, Mr. Michel Gondry. It feels very like grounded, and all the musical performances are, I believe, just like done on set, like on set audio and everything. But they're all written by the two actors, and they're actual like songs that they've like developed, and particularly the one Falling Slowly, which this won a Best Original Song Oscar back in the day. And I remember watching these Oscars and being like so unbelievably moved by that entire song when they performed it at the Oscars, like without any context. And then watching the movie, it's still just as devastating, if not more so. And I find Joe Carney to be like a really fascinating director. He usually deals with music, like I really like Sing Street. And he did also do Begin Again, which feels like a lesser version of the same movie, weirdly, with Ruffalo. speaking to
Oh yeah.
the current movie. But I think once definitely, I can see why people were like instantly fascinated by him with this movie, and I feel like it's definitely one of the ones from that Oscar period that has been a bit forgotten with time. And I would hope to recommend it just so more people would watch it, because I think it deserves a lot more attention, a lot more love out there. I don't know, have you guys seen this one?
No,
No, I love Sing Street though.
I was gonna
That's
say,
a
yeah,
great,
Sing
yeah,
Street's great.
it's a great movie. Which yeah, I hadn't really dived into John Carney that much, and I honestly had not heard of this movie to be honest. But
Yeah, apologies. I also called him Joe Carney, not John Carney. I apologize.
well, you know him personally, so you know him by Joe.
Yeah,
That's true. Me and Joe go way back.
No, yeah, I'd love to watch it though. It sounds great, and I think he has a really great his sensibilities for making musicals are really great. At least based on Sing Street, which I genuinely think about all the time, and I've been meaning to rewatch. So yeah,
Drive it like you stole it, man.
man,
it's
what a
classic.
But what's your pick, Brian?
My pick. I'm going with another Charlie Kaufman movie it's been named many times, but I want to talk about it a bit more because I rewatched it and I hadn't seen it in a very long time. I'm gonna recommend Adaptation, directed by Spike Jonze, and I didn't like this movie when I first saw it. I remember, and I don't know. I think I had watched it because of Charlie Kaufman. I watched Eternal Sunshine and I was like, I want to watch everything this guy has made. And I don't know, it was a weird movie. It just really put me off for some reason. Despite like the fact that I love all of Spike Jonze's other movies, which this also serves as a PSA, which I'll get to in a second. Yeah, I loved this movie. Watching it again, I was really blown away by it. And just kind of this weird meta narrative that I forgot how perfectly it is integrated into this movie. Like, the movie you're watching is the movie that Nicolas Cage, who plays Charlie Kaufman, is writing, and he's got a twin brother also played by Cage, who is really great in this movie, by the way. Is like, as both characters in this is just really, really, really stellar. But also Meryl Streep, and also this won an Oscar for Chris Cooper, which I was really surprised that he had won for Best Supporting Actor that year. But he's great in the movie, and as well a small cameo from Tilda Swinton, which we will also talk about on the Michael Clayton episode. But the PSA element is Spike Jonze, please make another movie. I miss you.
Please.
I think all the time about that sort of rumor that came out where he was like filming something with Frank Ocean and Brad Pitt.
Right.
And nothing ever happened at that. And I don't know. And I love that Beastie Boys documentary that he made, which was like a very interesting documentary and kind of the way that it was made. But yeah, I mean, her is 11 years old this year, which is crazy to think about. I can feel the gray hairs settling in, but yeah, Adaptation is incredible. It's a great movie about like writing and also just the creative process. It's a great movie about like, it's Charlie Kaufman looking at his place in Hollywood, especially at that time where he had made Being John Malkovich, and really kind of assessing what his place was and what he could do and what he wants to do, but maybe isn't able to do because of the industry and everything. And it's an incredibly smart movie still to this day. Lili, as you mentioned, you love this movie as well. I don't know, do you have anything to add for Adaptation?
I'm just dying to rewatch it again because I've been on a real Nick Cage kick lately. I did a double feature of Valley Girl and Mandy, just to get the kind of full breadth of his range. And he's like steadily become one of my favorite actors. I think because there's like a charming quality that I didn't really realize till Adaptation, which is he can make fun of himself. He is a goofball. I think he was misunderstood, that people thought he was like some serious, like taking himself very seriously, like Tom Cruise, capital A actor, and being from the Coppolas, like a lot of prestige and pressure there. But I think that movie is one of the most like revealing and exemplary of the fact that he can make fun of himself. He can embody the like most pathetic type of character and still be so charming and redeemable. And it's also very satisfying that he's kind of split in two, because you get such different perspectives on like the Hollywood machine, the people in it, the personalities, and the idiosyncrasies. So it's a great movie. I need to rewatch it. And Meryl Streep, incredible.
Oh, she's really great. It's a really kind of subtle, like, nuanced, like, street performance. Not that she isn't that normally, but like I feel like she often gets kind of lauded for her like bigger performances, but yeah, it's a great street performance as well.
She's a lot more down to earth and casual in that movie in a way that's kind of refreshing.
Yeah, her like snorting the like the drugs off the table and everything.
If you've ever looked up Susan Orlean, who she's playing, her Twitter, I don't know if it still exists since the great downfall of Twitter, but she's one of the funniest people to ever be on that app. She is just so chaotic and so funny. I actually think Meryl Streep toned her down. Also, Susan Orlean wrote an article that became the movie Blue Crush, and I just think that's a fun fact.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and though, by the way, we were mentioning Cage earlier. We didn't mention this, but he was the first choice for the Carrey role in Eternal Sunshine, which I find fascinating.
Yeah.
Weird.
Right.
I love Cage. I don't know if he could play as like dejected and broken. I guess maybe like Cage in like Pig mode, which I love him in Pig, but like I don't know if...
Right. It might be a bit overwhelming.
Yeah.
To the movie necessarily, right? But I mean, I love adaptation. I think particularly we haven't mentioned the amazing one scene turn from Brian Cox in that movie, which I think was the first time I like. Well, no, it was probably like X2 or some shit like that. But that was the first time I'm like, oh man, this guy's like so great. Just like him dressing down Nick Cage in that fucking seminar is so good. And I remember like seeing that in like early college and just genuinely breaking my brain. It was like, wait, so it's like a movie that he's writing, and then it's all this, and I was just like the construction of it like nearly broke my brain at the time. But yeah, I still think it's pretty great for sure. It's not my favorite of the sort of Kaufman Spike Jonze collaborations. I would still say, being John Malkovich, I prefer a bit more, but I still think that one's tremendous. But speaking of Spike Jonze, Lily, I think you have a related film for Between the Lines here.
I do, and it's been said and hinted around, but I chose the 2013 Spike Jonze movie, Her. Yet another movie I waited too long to see because it just seemed super sad, and I was like, no thanks. Life is already sad. Why would I put myself through that? But it is such an incredible love story, breakup movie, science fiction film, and I think that's what drew me to this choice and connection to Eternal Sunshine. Is I'm such a fan of like romantic, cozy sci-fi, like movies where that's just like happens to be an element that just so happens to be somewhat futuristic. So that's not like the focus. I was telling y'all about that movie I'm Your Man, the German movie with Dan Stevens, and it's also similar, even though the whole like core of that is like a woman dating a male robot. But the opposite of that in Her, with Joaquin Phoenix, and probably my favorite performance of his, and probably my favorite Scarlett Johansson performance, someone who I think has been like very sexualized, and like her physicality is very much like a part of her, so it was very cool to have her be in a role where you don't see her. I think she really proved her acting chops there, because it's just all her voice, and it's so evocative and visceral all the same. And how it's also similar to Eternal Sunshine is that you just see kind of like a what if scenario of a relationship, not the like messy linear side of it that we see in real life playing out slowly, steadily, painfully, pleasurably, whatever, but sort of like a relationship tailored to this one man. And when I say it like that, it sounds like the most like awful patriarchal like synthesis of a man's like fantasies, but it's not. And that's what's so brilliant, is similar to adaptation where Charlie Kaufman is a character, the main character. It could be self-indulgent that Spike Jonze wrote this movie, directed it, and he said sort of like his response to Sofia Coppola's Lost in Translation, but it's not self-indulgent in a pretentious like obnoxious way. It's very like introspective, self-reflective, critical of oneself. And I don't know, it's just not enough romances do that. It's either all pain or all like sappiness and saccharine. And what I love about her is that it's very gut-wrenchingly beautifully poetic and heartbreaking, but also very silly and real. And also Spike Jonze is like a little animated character in a video game, like saying fuck you to Joaquin. Like that over and over again will just play in my head. And it's awesome. But I'm just obsessed with like romantic cozy sci-fi, because God forbid there be any hard sci-fi with also a viable love story. But Peggy Sue Got Married, Somewhere in Time, like these romantic time travel ones, I'm a fan of that. Anything with like a side of sci-fi I think is super cool.
Here's a weird revelation about me. According to my Letterboxd, which I have used since about the time Her came out, I have seen Her 6 times.
Oh wow.
And it is kind of similar to Eternal Sunshine, a movie I haven't seen in a very long time that I am a little bit nervous to rewatch. But yeah, I loved this movie, and Joaquin is so great. I mean, he's probably my favorite actor of all time, and there's something so like, I don't know, you want to just give him a hug in this movie. He's so like, adorable in a weird way, and like, I also think Scarlett Johansson is really great in this movie. It is a great performance, which is kind of odd to think about, because you don't see her body, but like you really get a sense of like her personality coming through the movie, and like she also just has a very distinctive voice as well, which I love. But and also a great supporting cast in this movie with like Amy Adams, like Rooney Mara, Chris Pratt is really good in that movie, which is weird to think about.
Olivia Wilde.
Olivia Wilde is great, and like Bill Hader is in. He's like one of the chat like people.
So is Kristen Wiig.
Yeah. Right. Yes.
But yeah, no, I love Her, and double PSA: Spike Jonze, make another movie.
Come on.
Really underline it. But yeah, I love Her. I remember that was one of my favorite movies of like that decade, and I remember I didn't see it for like a long gap until like the last couple years. But it still like works so well for me, I think, particularly considering, one, Scarlett Johansson was like a late addition, because there was originally Samantha Morton on the set did the voice stuff, and she was gonna like be the final voice, and then Scarlett like dubbed over, and it doesn't feel at all like there's a disconnect whatsoever with that. It feels like perfect. But also I just love the fact that with like the sort of sci-fi angle of it, that like it's this movie about like this weird relationship and how it breaks apart because of basically the singularity, which is amazing to me. It was like, I don't know, we're different people, you're a human, and then artificial intelligence that's grown beyond my the confines that humanity's put me in, so I'm going somewhere else. But maybe you might show up later. Who knows? But yeah, especially also that it's like, of these sort of like near future movies, it feels like one of the more plausible ones. Truly. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Like I could see within 10 years we live in like sort of a Her society, quite frankly.
I think all the time about how this movie kind of came out pre like Tinder and like pre kind of like that, Bumble, all those like dating apps and everything. And it's such a fascinating, like weirdly like prescient movie about that kind of thing.
Yeah. And I'll underline as well, the Spike Jonze, please make another movie.
Please, we know you're listening.
Once you're done acting in like fucking Babylon and like, I don't know, what else was he in recently? Jackass Forever, of course.
Bad Grandpa or something, I don't know.
Right, maybe the Babylon thing gave him another edge, like, I need to direct again. I'm playing a director.
Direct Bad Grandpa 2 or something, or, I don't know.
Something.
Jackass 5 ever do it.
Sure, yeah.
Jeff Tremaine can take a backseat for a movie, come on. But yeah, let's go ahead and repeat our titles for everybody out there in case you want to add them to your watch lists and whatnot. My pick was the 2007 Oscar award-winning film Once.
Mine was the 2002 Spike Jonze directed, Charlie Kaufman written adaptation.
And mine was the 2013 Spike Jonze written and directed movie, Her.
Yes, and we're going to be winding up here, but we want to thank some people before we get out of here. We want to thank Burial Grid for our intro and outro music. Purchase this music at burialgrid.com. Thanks to Michelle Kyle for our artwork finder at MishKyle96 on Twitter. And thanks to our Cineast Patreons over at patreon.com/cinema2letter, where for just $1 a month, you all get to vote in polls for individual movies we cover, and also get to listen to bonus audio stuff. Like around this time, Bryan and I would have put out our audio review for The Beekeeper, which we've seen and we love, and we recommend you all watch it, and then become a patron and listen to our very goofy review, where we just were baffled and fascinated in every degree by Beekeeper. And also we'll be doing a retrospective of The Critic, the 90s animated series, which will be fun. And also we'll announce here, this is the first time on the main feed, you all will be able to hear it. In February, our big bonus audio thing will be our awards sort of program thing that we're planning. And we've come up with a name, which is the LOSES, which is the Letters of Cinematic Excellence Awards. Bryan and I will be talking about, our picks for best film and the acting category, cinematography, all sorts of stuff. And that'll be our big bonus one for February. So you get access to all that stuff for just the $1. And our last person to thank is Lili. Thank you so much for being a guest on the show. We really appreciate it. Where can people find you on the internet if you wish to be found?
Well, thank you so much for having me. This is a blast. I am on Instagram at lily.labens, Letterboxd at easywriter, that's EASYWRITER, and whatever is left of Twitter, I'm on there at Lily is okay. And my name is Lili, by the way. Most people spell it wrong, but you guys spelled it right, so.
The important thing. We did it on this workflow thing that you guys can't see. That's what counts, though. And in the description, hopefully, I'll continue to spell it right. But you can follow us on various socials like Instagram, Blue Sky. If Twitter is still around, we're still there probably, at cinema2letter. And you can find me specifically on stuff like Letterboxd and Twitter at NotTheWho'sTommy. And you also do some writing at marianithomas.wordpress.com and at film-cred.com.
And I'm also kind of on Twitter sometimes, at BRYANDRADE and the number 3. Or you can also follow me on Letterboxd at my name, where, watching movies, listing stuff, ranking, all that good stuff. So yeah, follow me on there.
And for more of just the audio stuff, you can follow us on places like Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to your podcasts on, whatever Pocket Casts or such that you all have out there. If you're listening on Talk Film Society, you want to listen to all the other great shows that are on the network that are just besides us, like Bryan and I were recently on the Talk Film Society podcast with Marcelo and Siobhan, where we had a lot of fun talking about Gravity and various other awards-related things. It was very enjoyable. And you can dig into our archives and our Podbean main feed for, the past 3 seasons of this show or the old Double-Edged Double Bill show, where you might hear Lily on one of the last episodes. You were one of the last guests we had on that show.
Oh,
after
iconic.
You were just like, we gotta stop it. We
So
gotta stop
iconic.
it. We can't continue. We can't top this possibly. We have to burn it all.
Or I ruined it. Tainted it.
I don't know. That's the more Charlie Kaufman read.
Yeah, exactly.
on your guest appearance. But yeah, if you can't support us on the Patreon, the completely free way to help us out is to rate, review, or simply share the show around to give us more visibility so people won't forget us. So we don't disappear from people's memories in weird Michel Gondry kind of clever ways. But yeah, we'll just tease our next episode, our End for New, in our one Oscar series. Will be about Another Round, the Mads Mikkelsen Best International Film, the first international film winner, quote unquote, with that title of the award. I'm curious, Lily, have you seen this one?
Yes, I loved it. I contemplated picking this. I didn't know if I had as much to say other than Mads Mikkelsen, hot, uh, alcohol, good. I get it. I don't know. I'll definitely have to listen though. I'm curious to hear your thoughts because I watch it with my whole family at like, weird, depressing COVID time. So I should probably give it another watch with a new perspective.
Yeah, put that on the Blu-ray, by the way. Drinking good, Mads Mikkelsen hot. Lili Labens.
It's all for free. Take it.
Hell yeah, dude. But yeah, it'll be interesting to talk about that one, Brian. Especially, it feels like a very we had a rough time thinking of the sort of new our 2020 forward with like movies that have won an Oscar. Not a lot of great picks,
Right.
really.
But this was kind of feels like the one from that like 2020 Oscar year that like still kind of lingers a bit, right? Like I feel like I see that clip of the ending of that movie on Twitter circulating like every once in a while. It feels like it still kind of like lingers, which of course is due to the Mads Mikkelsen of it all, because God, what a hottie.
Oh, we'll be going mad about Mads next time. But until then, everybody, let's get out of this bed that's on the beach that's like snowy for some reason. Let's keep living our lives.
I'm having deja vu.
Spike Jonze, TikTok. We'll be waiting.